Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Defiant Lawyers Network. And as you see, I am honored to have a guest today who is no stranger to many of you because of his massive presence on social media, speaking out about issues that are extremely important to me as well. So I reached out to him and I invited him to come on the show. We had some small talk ourselves and chatted a little bit. And I'm happy that he agreed to come on the show today. And so we're just gonna have sort of a dialogue, but not so much a dialogue. I've already sort of forewarned him that as an attorney, I sort of approach these interviews like a deposition. So I'm really just going to sit back and talk and let him educate us on, as you see in the bottom lower third there, that I want to talk to him about Trump and the white conservative movement. And he is very much qualified to help us understand all that. So before we get started, let me give Matthew Pridgeon, I will refer to him throughout this interview as Matt. Let me give Matt a proper introduction. And right after that, he will start sharing with us his knowledge, his wisdom, his understanding of Trump in this white conservative movement. All right. My guest today is Matthew Pridgeon, an author, filmmaker, Christian activist, an advocate for racial and economic justice, whose personal journey has taken him across some extraordinary divides in American life. Matt grew up in an affluent conservative white family in Charleston, South Carolina. He attended Duke University, where he earned a degree in economics. But his life took a dramatic turn as a young man after struggling with drug addiction and surviving a suicide attempt in the Atlantic Ocean. Very interesting story. You're going to hear about that. Matt says that experience ultimately led him from atheism to faith in Jesus Christ and began a transformation that would shape the rest of his life. Years later, another transformation occurred. While doing Christian ministry in Charleston's historically Black East Side community, Matt held a tent revival where he baptized 8 young Black girls and later became involved with children and families in the neighborhood. Through those relationships, Matt says he began confronting realities about systemic racism, poverty, and American history that his own upbringing had largely shielded him from. That experience eventually forced Matt to reconsider not only his understanding of race, but also his politics. Matt has been a lifelong Republican and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. He later broke with the political movement, the Maga political movement surrounding Trump, and became increasingly critical of the relationship between white evangelical Christianity, race, and political power. Matt has written several books, including From Folly, America's Street, and Confessions of a Late-Night Uber Driver. Most recently, he wrote and narrated the documentary, you can find it on Amazon Prime, The Sins of Our Fathers, Race, Religion, and the Rise of Trump. The film examines the historical relationship between race, Christianity, and American political power, from slavery and segregation through the rise of the modern religious right and MAGA movement. Today, Matthew Pridgeon describes himself as an evangelical Christian while challenging what he sees as the political corruption of evangelical Christianity and calling white Christians toward racial justice, repentance, and reconciliation. Matthew Pridgeon, welcome to the Defiant Lawyers.
Thank you so much for having me. That was quite an introduction.
I hope I did okay. Is there anything you need to correct from that introduction?
You're all good. All good.
All right. So, Matt, I want to go way back and just allow you to sort of walk us up to this moment that we're living in here. And I think
Right.
it's just really important for the audience to have some context in order to understand some of the things that you're going to say in this interview. So let's go back and get some family and cultural background that shaped who you are, and some of it you have gotten away from, and you will explain all of that to us. So, Matt, what do you know about when and how your ancestors first arrived to America?
Right. Actually don't have a whole lot of that information. My mom's side is mostly German and English. My dad's side, the last name Pridgeon, is one of those names that doesn't trace back to Europe. So we don't have lineage. Most Pridgeons came out of North Carolina. And you can find them all over the country, but definitely European ancestry. Like I said, on my mom's side, German and English, and so that's about all I know in terms of ancestry.
So, how did your family eventually land in Charleston, South Carolina?
My grandfather moved to Charleston, and he ended up building a house in the South of Broad neighborhood, which is the most affluent part of downtown Charleston. And it's exactly what the name says. It's everything south of Broad Street. And what was interesting about growing up in Charleston is there was a line of demarcation in the city. It was Calhoun Street. So we were told as kids never to go north of Calhoun Street. And that was sort of the racial context that I grew up in. And, for the most part, we didn't. And I do remember if we ever did, drive through black parts of town, I remember locking doors and that being kind of normal, like the fear factor. And it wasn't spoken most of the time. My parents were not overtly racist in any way. That never was a topic of conversation, never any racial slurs or anything like that. But it was this idea, that our city is divided. And that's really, when you talk about the second awakening, that's where I always like to start because it really adds context. Basically, I crossed the line that I wasn't supposed to cross. And what I found was that there was a mythology about that line, about what was north of that line. And we were always told, that the East Side neighborhood is the poorest part of downtown Charleston.
Well,
That's where most of the city's housing projects are located. And the
you,
mythology I'm talking about is that this community was poor because they're lazy on welfare, basically.
well,
And
Matt,
I crossed the line and realized that it's not. It's that it was a mythology and not truth.
you're getting a little bit ahead of us.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm sorry.
that's fine. We're going to get there. That's really juicy
Okay.
stuff. But before I get there, before I get there, I do want my audience to have a good sense of who you are. So, in terms of the history of your family, do you know if there were any people in your lineage that were enslavers?
Not that I know of. No.
Okay. Um, so you were just telling us a little bit about your parents and the fact that they were not overtly racist in any way. You didn't hear the N word and that sort of thing. Um, were they were they Democrats early on? Have they always been Republicans? Let's talk a little bit about their political um, upbringing, background, your family.
Right. Yes. So Democrat's a bad word in our family. Always very conservative. Always Republican. I grew up. It was never sort of like are you going to vote Republican? The only conversation was, which Republican are you going to vote for in the primary? That was sort of the way it was pitched. So yeah, I grew up in that all Republican world.
Okay, so never Democrats to your knowledge.
No, no, definitely not.
All right, I know a lot of whites from the South were initially Democrats, and then joined the Republican Party, but that is not your family's journey.
Well, my dad, it could be. My dad was actually born in 1941 and he knew Strom Thurmond. So there is a chance that he was part of that movement. Strom Thurmond started the Dixiecrat Party, which eventually failed, and then moved out of the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. He didn't really ever talk much about that time period. Um, so I'm not. It could have been that case a very young person, but I'm not sure. He never really talked about that.
What about your grandparents?
Um, as far as I know, they were conservative. My grandparents died when I was younger, so I didn't know them that well.
Okay, okay, and so let's talk a little bit about Charleston itself. You were beginning to talk about the different communities and sides of Charleston. Um, and I've been there. I've been there. I'm from North Carolina. Wasn't born there, but I was raised in North Carolina. And so I went down to Charleston maybe twice, and took a marriage retreat group down to Charleston. I told you about that experience. Maybe I'll share that later. Um, but Charleston, like so many southern cities, is, I don't know how it is today, and I'll leave that to you, but steeped in the Confederacy. Is that still the case today?
It's one of those things that's hiding in plain sight, I would say. Famously, South Carolina took down the Confederate flag. It took nine lives being taken to finally get that flag down off of the state house. And actually, 2 blocks from where I grew up, there was always a group of Confederate, I don't even know what you call them, activists who would come every Sunday with their big pickup trucks. And there was one pickup truck that had a giant flagpole, and they would just go stand on the Battery Wall, which is the very tip of the Charleston Peninsula, and fly that Confederate flag, because there is a Confederate monument right at the tip of the peninsula that we talk about in the documentary. So they would camp out right there with their Confederate flags and sometimes Confederate uniforms, and hang out. And it was interesting because in 2020, there was a lot of interesting, borderline violent interactions at that as they were being confronted by protesters. Before, there really wasn't any confrontation, but um, I haven't seen them as much since then. But also, I don't go down to that part of Charleston as much anymore as I used to.
So was your community, did it embrace the Confederacy, that mindset of the Confederacy?
So the minds, again, it's very subtle. I remember having a conversation at a family dinner, and it was a cousin who was adamantly arguing that the cause of the Civil War was states' rights. And my dad used to refer to the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression. So it's never outright spoken. No one's saying, "Hey, we love the Confederacy." No one's saying, "Hey, we love Jim Crow." But the mythology of the lost cause that really began as early as the 1880s and 1890s, indoctrinating white Southerners and glorifying the Old South and glorifying the Confederate soldiers and the Confederate cause. I think that is what has seeped into the present. And my question has always been, if the Civil War was about states' rights to do what? Right? I mean, if you look at the Confederate documents, it was clear that they were breaking from the Union because of slavery. There's no doubt about it. But this mythology that there was some kind of economic issue, and it was overreach of power and all this nonsense. You know, the reality is that the Confederacy broke away from the Union because of slavery, and that was 100% the cause of the Civil War. But the fact that you can't say that openly, and the fact that that's even up for debate, is a testimony to the power of that lost cause mythology and how it has persisted into the year 2026.
So, Nikki Haley, she is a former South Carolina governor
Right?
and a former, I think she ran for president,
Yeah,
um, and was also, I think, UN ambassador under Trump, if I recall
it was.
correctly.
Yep.
So her lineage is South Asian. So how does she become the governor of a state like South Carolina?
Well, you know how it is. I mean, whiteness is an interesting concept, and this is something that we talk a lot about. How whiteness is a construct. If you have the right outward appearance, you fit into whiteness. It really is an odd concept. Our pastor talks a lot about how race is never mentioned in the Bible in terms of color. It's always ethnicity, culture, nationality, never color. There's never a black white in scripture. But we created the black white in order to justify slavery, essentially, to create a dividing line between who could be enslaved and who reaped the benefits of American prosperity. So Nikki Haley has the outward appearance, and so I think that's. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth. Is that that's how white supremacy works. If you have, the right complexion, the right features, you're in the in crowd. It's just like the one drop rule. You have the wrong features, you have a drop of black blood, and you're out. Even though your skin might be the same color as Nikki Haley's or mine. So it's an odd construct, and I think it's very important for us to understand that it was literally fabricated, and that's one of the main things that we really need to deal with as a society. Who's in and who's out in terms of whiteness.
So, I mean, Nikki Haley is a brown skinned woman. So, the argument could be made that she really doesn't, like yourself, who has fair skin. Nikki Haley is a brown skinned woman from, again, her lineage is South Asian, yet accepted by the white conservative movement there in South Carolina at that time.
I never thought of her as being brown skinned, to tell you the truth. I mean, she's light enough that she always appeared. I didn't even know that that was her background until much later when she was governor. I was young, but she was always sort of like no one ever mentioned that in any circle I was ever in.